We had some technical difficulties with my computer opening too many windows at one time. This is a webinar on the topic of rosette disease with emphasis in Texas. This webinar is directed to Texas producers, landscape professionals, landscape managers, and the general public and that are out there. And what I like to do is to explore a little bit about the history of this disease, and then focus in on the fact that how we think it might have shown up or when it showed up in Texas, and go through the kind of recommendations that we are providing right now as Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and reasons why those recommendations were made. First slide here is a map that I basically lifted off a paper, basically a book chapter from Dr. Amrine, which was published in 2002, showing the spread, or at least the reported incidence of rosette disease. And what I did with this was to just focus in on Texas, and what you do find is there were 6 counties that were reported, at least on this 2002 map. Those counties were Russ and Smith County in East Texas, that's where Tyler is, Collin and Grayson County, to the north of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Tarrant County, where Fort Worth is, and Palo Pinto County, which is a couple of counties over to the west. That was 2002. What I did was overlay the observations that we have had, or I've made since I started at A&M in 2002, all the way to current observations. And so what we get is the blue overlay, those current observations where we believe we have a positive find. In 6 of those counties, we do have positive tests from PCR testing. And so that's a genetic identification. And those counties are Dallas, Collin, Tarrant, Ellis, Denton, and Rockwall. If you can see my cursor, what I'm circling is this is the particular area. So it's essentially the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex northwards. Now, just to give you a little background on the history of rosette. Rosette was basically reported to be observed in the 1940s, in 1940 in Manitoba, Canada. Shortly thereafter, in 1941, it was reported in, or at least it was reported that it was observed in California in 1941 and also in Wyoming. Then jumping forward in the 1970s and 80s, there were reports that it was common in Arkansas, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and into the Ohio River Valley. So that would include Kentucky, Indiana. I think Pennsylvania was even mentioned in it as well. In the 90s, that's where we start to see it in Texas, where it showed up on multiflora rootstock in fields around Tyler, Texas. That's in East Texas. Now, taking from there and saying, looking into the history that is in Texas. Now, one thing I do want to stress here, rosette disease seems to have been a more serious problem in places other than Texas. So what we do find is in the Mid-South, in recent years, there have been a lot more disease problem. States like Tennessee do see this problem throughout the state. We don't in Texas. We seem to be limited towards the North Texas region. So give you a short history of rosette in Texas. In the early 90s, it was found on multiflora rose rootstock in the Tyler area, where we do have a rose industry. In 96, this is not an official find per se, but there is a report, at least that's been written down, that rosette was found in Hageman Wildlife Refuge in Grayson County. 1997, I believe this was Dr. George Philly, who is a retired plant pathologist from Overton, basically ID'd Rose Rosette from a rose from Mineral Wells that is in Palo Pinto County. 98, Rose Rosette shows up in Fort Worth, and later that year in the summer, Rose Rosette shows up in Plano, which is in Collin County. So this just hopefully gives you a progression of the disease that we find in Texas. The whole point of this slide is to show you that this is not a new disease that is occurring for us. It just, in the last few years, we have had basically an expanding problem, and partly it is due to the expanded use of shrub roses in landscapes. Again, some background. The wild rose, or the multiflora rose, is you could say has to do a lot with why there's Rose Rosette being spread so widely. Multiflora rose was introduced to the U.S. from Asia about 200 plus years ago, so it's in the 1800s. But in the first half of the 20th century, it was kind of promoted as a hedgerow for erosion control or natural fence, or even for a kind of wildlife refuge type situation. Well, the multiflora rose is well established in many parts of the U.S., and it's also a good host for the vector that carries the virus that causes Rose Rosette disease. Give you a few pictures here. The wall type rose, we probably have all seen this in right-of-ways or even forested type areas. Yet another one in scrub areas, you do tend to see them as weeds growing in there right now. Going on to Rose Rosette symptoms. There's a whole bunch of different symptoms that's manifested, and I'm going to show you several over the next few slides. The most common that has been described is witch's broom. And witch's broom, just as it says, it creates a cluster of tissue, plant tissue, that looks like a broomstick, like a witch's broomstick. You do occasionally get increased thorn production. One of the observations that have been made is this thorns, even though still sharp and can hurt you, seems to be softer and more pliable. Occasionally we'll see thickened canes, not flattened canes, but thickened. So that cane seems to be thicker, rounder, and denser in some sense. We do see diminished leaf sizes. We can get deformed or distorted leaves as well as flowers. And in some cases, we do get increased reddish coloration to the affected tissues. We can also get shoot elongation, apinacity, and death of tissue. Couple of notes that I put down there to remind me not to forget about this is the increased redness does not occur on some ornamental varieties, and increased thorn production also does not occur on some varieties, include the multiflora. So on this slide here on the left, showing you some red shoots, rapid shoot elongation, and witch's broom type symptomology, but what you would notice is there's no excessive thorniness. In fact, it's almost devoid of thorns. But on the right, you get the tissue reddening, and you also get the increased thorniness, particularly on the cane towards the end of that cane. More witch's broom symptom, but this is more on the flowering head, and what you do find is this compactness of plant tissue growth, and the flower, where the flowers are being formed, those tissues is distorted. And on the right, you do see a bit more of a reddish coloration. So you got two different things that's going on, well, two different samples here that you're looking at. Redding Leaf tissue, this is another example of it. Leaf distortion, usually you see enhanced serration or altered shape. Quite often you do find that the leaf, instead of the normal nice lanceolated type leaf, it becomes a narrow, thin, elongated leaf. And quite often you will also get blighted blossoms. The flowers actually open up, they misform, and they basically decline very quickly. We do get apiaceous shoot or leaf curling. These are some examples of from samples that we obtained that tested positive. For rose rosette, we do get increased red coloration, and if you notice the leaves, those leaves are diminished in size, and in fact a little bit distorted as well. Next few slides are some pictures of some work that I did with rose rosette back in 2006, and these are pictures from my test plot that was run out at the Research and Extension Center in Dallas. The variety here that you see is, I believe it's Lamarne, and where we have the damaged areas, the witch's broom. In fact, the slight discoloration, distorted leaves, you can see right smack in the middle of your screen. If you look off to the side, whether it's to the left or to the bottom right, you'll notice some what look like normal looking foliage. An additional picture from a different view, you do get some of that shoot elongation where you get a sudden spurt of growth, but that growth at the end of that, you do get a lot of distorted growth, which is brooming, some reddish coloration, which is not typical of this particular variety, and just very thin leaves, and so you do have some distorted growth in there. One thing I should also mention that was interesting with this particular study, that when we found that this symptoms occurring, we did find a lot of the aerophyte mice, which is the vector, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But we also found co-infection with powdery mildew. So this is what that plot looks like. Just one thing to point out here from afar, when you look at this plot, this is quite severe. You may be able to pick out certain areas such as this where my cursor is, or over here, and to the left plot there. Those shoots that seem out of place, and a lot of times when I say you see something out of place, go closer to get a better look, to basically ascertain if it does have the symptoms that is consistent with rose rosette. Now moving on to the vector, the mite. Just a little bit history about rose rosette virus and the mites. Early on, back in the 80s or even the 70s, people were talking about rose rosette disease, and based on observations and some research, it was reported that the aerophyte mite is the vector of a pathogen that causes rose rosette disease. And some experiments basically suggested that the pathogen is actually a virus, but it was not shown or proven until 2011, when some folks in Arkansas actually published a paper demonstrating that it was a virus that actually caused rose rosette disease. So the nice part here is based on observational skills, some experiments. The suggestion that the causal agent was a virus was already in place way before that there was a published scientific paper that proved that a virus was indeed the causal agent for this disease. What we know a little bit about rose rosette diseases is the disease appears to be restricted to the genus Rosa, just roses. All rose varieties, as far as has been reported, is said to be susceptible. This particular disease is capable of killing the rose. I guess some susceptible species can be killed within a few months, and others perhaps a few years. The mite that transmit the virus is called Phylococcus fructiferus, and it's very small. And I put down the size there. It's approximately 150 microns by 40 microns across. And on the right image is a picture that one of my students took of the mites at the base of one of the where the leaf attaches to on the stem. So if you see where the red arrow is, there is about 4, 5, 6 different mites there. There's quite a number of mites. This is a real small. It's not an easy thing to look for with a hand lens. You do have to squint. You do have to look real carefully to find it. And occasionally they'll be moving if they're active. That photograph was taken, I believe, at about 60 times or 80 times magnification. I think it's 60 times to 80 times magnification, yes. Now, in terms of the perspective of the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab, how do we go about saying something is positive or not? Well, prior to having a genetic confirmatory analysis test, we used to call a positive based on the presence of several symptoms and characteristics. One is, does it have the visual symptomology? Does it have those characteristic symptoms? Potentially the redness, the thorniness on some varieties, the witch's broom, the weird growth, that sort of thing. We also look for the presence of the aerophyte mites. And so if we do find consistent symptoms with presence of Phylococcus fructiferus, then we would say that it is Rosette positive. If we don't find the aerophyte mites, we do call it a suspect. In some cases, we never did use this, but electron microscopy has been used to identify, I guess, virus particles in affected plant tissue. Currently, what we do use is, since the 2011 paper came out, there are tools that were developed to help detect Rosette virus using genetic tools to look for the basically RNA virus. And so we do have a test for that we can perform, although we do find that working with rose tissue can be a little bit difficult, because in roses there are a lot of plant chemicals that can interfere with the polymerase chain reaction of the genetic analysis. The leading up to the recommendations Texas AgriLife, A&M AgriLife Extension puts out there is trying to address the question, if it's a virus, why do we recommend such, and what's so bad about a virus? Well, the fact of the matter is, when a plant is infected with the virus, we don't have an effective treatment or way to eradicate that virus from the plant. The plant could potentially hold or harbor the virus systemically. What that means is that virus could infect the plant at one location and continue to infect and be present in many locations within the plant itself. And there's some issues here with fear that if it is systemic, then it's in the roots, then even though we may get rid of a plant, the virus may still be present and could reinfect a plant through roots. We don't have that information. That is a theory. Also, the infected plants, because we cannot eradicate the virus from the infected plant, that plant can become a reservoir of the virus. In other words, a mite could land on this particular plant, feed on it, and acquire the virus and transmit it to other healthy roses. Don't know this information either, but there is a possibility that the virus may be persistent in the vector. In other words, all the mite has to do is to feed once and acquire the virus, and may be able to indefinitely carry that virus and cause multiple infections at future places where it would feed on. We don't have that information, or at least I am not aware of information that would suggest one way or another. So moving to the current recommendation that we have out there, one, we said remove confirmed or symptomatic plants early after observation, and this include roots. If possible, bag and discard. Do not compost. The reason to bag and discard is because if you remove a plant and there are mites on it, you just do not want to throw that bush in the back of your truck and drive to the dump. You may be spreading the mites along the way. That's why bag it up before transporting it somewhere. Secondly, treat adjacent plants with miticide to reduce probability of transmission by the aerophyte mites. The suggestion, at least with the homeowner, I think what they have available is avid or abamectin, and potential use of horticultural oils to basically have an effect on the mites. Commercially, I believe a couple of other brand names of miticides have been suggested, Akari and Judo. One thing to note here, using a miticide will not stop the virus if it's already in the plant. You are trying to stop the spread of the mites. So we cannot get rid of the virus from the plant, and we don't want to spread the virus throughout. So using a miticide, what we're trying to do is attack the virus and prevent the spread of the disease through the vector. Thirdly, remove any wild rose from the vicinity of cultivated roses. If you are in an area perhaps that abuts to open area that may have some wild roses or multiflora roses, it would be advisable, if you could, get rid of those wild roses, unless you want to keep them for some other purpose. Fourthly, monitor for symptoms and act quickly when and if symptoms are observed. I think in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area, we have had reports from a lot of different places. And so one approach that you can take is by monitoring aggressively, and when it shows up, removing it immediately. You're trying to get rid of not only the reservoir of virus, but also the mites that may be on the plant, and that could reduce the risk of the disease basically getting out of hand. So those are the recommendations that we have put out there on our A&M publication. One of the other statements that we did put down there is, we say it's currently unknown whether the virus may be transmitted to root grafts underground, but we do recommend that removal of roots be done as an extra precaution. There are a couple of other discussions that we can have regarding to, what about pruning and what about miticide alone? Will that reduce the disease problem? No, but I do know some of my colleagues out there, especially I think the one in Tennessee, have said that they can have an alternative approach where they aggressively prune and with treatments of miticide reduce the incidence on a year-to-year basis to about 5 to 10%. What that means is you can still have nice roses, but understand the fact that the virus is still present. Just to show you a few mimics here, this is not, when we get a sample in the clinic, we have to make the call whether it's suspect or not before we go further, and we do get quite a number of samples that come in where people think it might be rosette. Unfortunately, it's something else. Couple of common mistakes that folks make is they see symptoms that caused by herbicide damage. This is just one example of it here. That's with an inadvertent spray of glyphosate on rose. And another one which sometimes we have seen in the clinic where people mistakenly think it might be rose rosette was actually powdery mildew. This is probably not the best slide that I have, but the picture on the right showing powdery mildew, severe powdery mildew on tips of the branches. And when you do get that, you do get some distortion, essentially potentially some elongation as well. A couple of last slides to show you. This is a picture of a knockout bush. Well, actually a patch of them at the church where I attend. And if you look at this, you probably notice a few red stuff in there. This is a close-up of it. We get a bunch of samples that come in where people think, oh my goodness, my rose, knockout rose has rose rosette. And they send in samples like this. This is not rose rosette. It is normal for the knockout. Now to show you another picture of knockout planting. Here you can see a lot more things that seem to be sticking out, and when you get closer you do get some of that witch's broom, that distortion, that reddening, basically overall not looking great. That actually is a positive push for rose rosette. Got to actually take this picture at the USDA campus when I was up in Maryland. If you do suspect or see rose rosette, particularly in counties other than those that I've mentioned earlier in this presentation, please contact your local Texas A&M AgriLife Extension County office or us at the Texas Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab. I would love to get hands on potential samples from counties that are not within those counties that I mentioned before. Just to let you know a little bit about the rose rosette activity at the plant clinic. We are doing PCR testing for confirmation. We are still trying to optimize that, trying to find a good, quick, foolproof way to do this consistently each time, and we're still working on it. We have something that we feel pretty confident of, but it could be better. In summer of 2014, I do have an undergraduate research scholar that has a project of trying to collect and catalog symptom and cultivar information. Basically, what she's putting together is a sort of an online survey to solicit assistance from the general public if they do have rose rosette or what they suspect to be rose rosette, to fill out a form. We are interested in the type of variety of roses that they have and the type of symptoms that they are seeing. Also with this project, that student will have to do some on-site visits, basically to confirm the information that's provided, but also hopefully to pick up some physical samples of varieties that we have not tested before, so that we can do some confirmatory testing. In the future, there will be some work that will be done, not just by us, but a bunch of other folks, on looking at best management approaches to dealing with rose rosette in the landscape, keeping in mind that we want to find the best way to take care of the roses and still be able to enjoy the roses in the presence of rose rosette. So those are some of the things that are occurring. Just to leave you, we do have a presence on the web, plantclinic.tamu.edu, and we do put a whole bunch of stuff off and on, not just about rose rosette, but other things on our Facebook. That's with that, I'm going to stop right here, and we'll take whatever questions that you might have. And I do believe that I do have some of my other colleagues that are in research in the audience, so at any time, if anybody wants to chime in, I guess Dr. Gu will have the power of turning on your microphones. Okay, I'm changing the presenter back to Dr. Gu. Thank you.